Okay, it's the end of the day and you all chose a super interesting topic. Doesn't sound interesting, but we will try to convince you. It's actually quite powerful. So for this session, this case study, we want to talk about logistics data, last mile logistics data, and why they can make a huge difference to your operations, to your cost structures, but also to your customer satisfaction. And yeah, my name is Dana. Thanks for the introduction. I'm the founder and chief commercial officer of Parcel Perform. We are the data nerds because what we do is we aggregate parcel tracking data across 700 different carriers. And I'm joined today by Sven, one of our customers. So maybe Sven, you want to give a quick introduction as well?
Yeah, just quickly to myself. My name is Sven, 37 years old. Live with my wife and the 2 kids, 2 boys, 2 and 4 years old in Heidelberg, Germany. Joined my employer, Emma Sleep Company, 1 year ago, already. And with my team taking care of global logistics. Just 2 more words on Emma. So we are a founder-managed omnichannel hypergrowth scale-up that was founded 2015. And yeah, last fiscal year, 2020, we made 405 million euros of revenue with selling mattresses, bed-in-a-box, accessories like pillows to customers in more than 30 countries worldwide. Not only D2C customers, but also retailers and marketplaces.
Cool. Thank you, Sven. So I think for everyone joining, just very briefly, we are the Data Nerd Talk. We talk about logistics data in the last mile. And again, I'm really impressed what Sven and Emma are doing because they literally ship mattresses to over 30 different countries, which is anyway hard to do already. And I know you also return some of them. So we definitely want to learn more about that today. But I thought before we asked all the questions, maybe one very important one. Who of you thinks you know where all your parcels are at any given point in time? Can I get a hand? Anyone? Okay. Do you know how well your carriers are performing? Do they give you any form of performance reporting? So, just one person gets a performance reporting? There must be more.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, cool. How do you get it?
We get it via email.
Via email from the carrier?
Bestseller, so we're also working with you.
Fair enough. Okay, you get our performance reporting then. How about yourself? How do you get it?
We harmonize the data in our system. Yeah, self-made system.
Okay, so you have an internal tool to then look at the data. Anyone else that gets carrier performance reporting? Yes. Okay, cool. And you see all the performance data in there. How did you get it beforehand? Do you still remember a time from before that?
Yes. Directly from the carriers.
Okay.
Yeah, just consolidate it across the 4 or 5 different carriers.
Cool. Anyone else has a hack on how to get last mile performance reporting? No, Sven, how do you get it?
The question is, how did we get it before? So
Yes.
to put it in some background. So as I mentioned, we have more than 30 countries, or customers serving in more than 30 countries worldwide. And what is our philosophy is that everything that has a direct impact on the customer should be executed locally. Meaning, when it comes to last mile management or executional management of last mile and also reverse logistics, this is from our point of view directly linked to the customer experience. So there needs to be a close alignment to the customer service center as well. And when it comes then also to kind of unsatisfied customers, it's also very important to have all information on hand to act accordingly. So 30 countries all over the world. You operated quite along out of the Singapore area. So
Yes.
in continental Europe, that's from our experience, it's quite easy compared to the global network because you do not have that much carriers and they are more or less quite advanced when it comes to the data. But if you're operating in Southeast Asia or LATAM, it's getting difficult. So how to get the data? So it's no this way or this way. So we have kind of a hybrid approach depending on the region where we are.
Super interesting. Thanks for sharing. So I think for today, we prepared a few slides, but we also want to keep the session very interactive. So any kind of insights, questions, learnings that you had, because obviously there's a way on how Emma does it. There's a way what we think is the best practice as well. But we also want to learn from you. So let's really make this interactive as possible. So, okay, what do we do for today's session? One is a little bit to understand why last mile transparency matters. I think we all kind of know, but let's quickly talk about that. Then the benefits of having this data at hand. What can you actually do with that data? And last but not least, we actually packed some reports, so actual last mile reports and how they can look like if the carrier is not giving it to you. Because it's a lot more powerful if you don't get it from the carrier and you actually have a neutral view on performance and you can actually compare carriers with each other, because that's also a big challenge at the moment. Okay, why am I standing here? I already said it. I worked at DHL for quite a long time. We realized specifically in Asia, where we started the business Parcel Perform, and I spent a lot of time with DHL, there were thousands of customers, so only a handful got a customized performance reporting. So you actually never really know what happens, and then on top of it, it's really hard to compare the carriers with each other. But the impact of having transparency is obviously huge, because the more you know about what the carrier does, the more smart decisions you can take on picking the right carrier and giving the right service levels to your customers. So happy clients should be one of the outcomes of knowing what's happening to your deliveries. And the other one, very important probably to all of you, is also, of course, to save costs. So what's happening at the moment in the market, and I think most of you who ship stuff already know this, there's a capacity constraint on one hand, meaning even though you would want to work with a new carrier or you want to ship more parcels, it's really hard to actually, specifically now before peak, to even get into the networks of the carriers. And then second aspect here, of course, I think I just picked the FedEx example here. Shipping gets more and more expensive. So while you're trying to know exactly what's going on in your delivery, you're also having to pay a lot more money for it. And then if you're unlucky and you're too late before peak, you don't even get into the network of the carrier. So having that transparency can really make quite a big difference, I believe. So what's happening as well, now that we have kind of more e-commerce shipments due to the COVID situation, additional carriers coming into the game, specializing, I think everyone is having more and more different last mile partners. And it's probably also one of the reasons why you're all here, to speak to all the potential last mile partners that you can work with. But the question is always, how do you judge? Is cost really your only comparison to pick the right partner for you? Or are there other elements like quality? And then if you look at quality, how do you know about this? So I think one observation we made is that next to price and capabilities, also what your customer wants is super important, right? And if we look at the data, you see that only basically 68% of all consumers order if fast delivery is available. This is even stronger in Asia, where they just wouldn't order if it's not there next day or you have some sort of a delivery promise. A lot of UK retailers by now offer next-day delivery services. And this is a very stark number that is not so important for logistics, but very important for your e-commerce businesses, is if there's extra shipping cost, a lot of the customers are actually abandoning the charts. Now, what does that mean? Costs are rising, less capacity in the market, but the customers are not ready to pay for it. So while you have to spend all your margin, we should probably choose very wisely and have as much transparency as you can to then pick the right carrier to work with. Did you make similar experiences on the Emma side? How do you deal with the fact that clients want it fast?
It's also there's no direct answer, because it also differentiates from region to region and also in some countries. So, for example, in France, we even have to differentiate between the Paris area and also the kind of the countryside, because the expectations are differently, and customers also want to, they rather tend to be that they want to have an accurate delivery time than a quick one. So it's more important, that's from our point of view, or the experience that we made, it's more important for the customers to know when does it exactly come. And it does not mean when it's the first email is sent out or the first notification that it's on the way, but already on the ordering process. So that's what we experienced. This is most important for the customers to know exactly what is the lead time and how accurate is it. You mentioned I think it was on the first slide, you can only measure, you can only improve what you can measure. What we did is, at least in the past year, we differentiated in 3 different pillars. First one, transparency in cost, as you mentioned. The second pillar, transparency in performance. We talked also a bit about it. And the third one is the transparency in processes, which is closely linked also to the transparency of the performance of the partners, because only if you, that's what we learned, differentiate between those 3 pillars, you are able to identify the big levers. And yeah, I think I can share that. We are quite a young company. We had a huge a CAGR of 130% in the last 5 years, which is kind of immense. So we had to identify the big levers and couldn't solve the last 5% to be very perfect. So this was very important for us to have the transparency to really choose our battles where we want to improve.
Absolutely. Perfect. All right, then let's look into a few more details. And, you know, this you all know, right? Last mile can get insanely complex. You have all these different delivery methods. And one question that we are always asking our clients is, do you actually know how you deliver? Does it deliver first time? Is it to home? How much is the share of parcel lockers? Who thinks they really know? Do you get a really good overview on where you're delivering, how much redeliveries, how many parcel lockers? Do you have transparency on that? Yes, you have? Cool. Anyone else? Does the carrier give you a different invoice depending on how much they had to redeliver or where they actually delivered to? Does anyone put these 2 things together on what they did and how much you're paying for? Are you? Yes, you do? Amazing. How do you do it?
With experience, after we see extra charges, we go in and see the breakdown, what's going on with it. But it's a past experience, so we have to go and look for the alternatives afterwards. But it's not a real-time comparison with the software help or anything. So it's
a manual effort, is it?
It's a manual effort.
How often do you do that?
Well, my team does it, so they're really complaining about it. But based on the countries, I mean, in Turkey, for example, we have enough experience. We work with 13 different last mile delivery companies, but when you go to parcels, it's a different story. I mean, it's a time-consuming issue. That's why we needed some sort of comparison software in order to make a quicker decision for optimizing the full result.
Cool, super interesting. Thanks for sharing. All right, so what is actually the problem? And I believe one of the big problems to really tackle transparency in logistics is that there's no standard, right? So the first problem is that many of you operate on a very complex kind of multi-country, multi-delivery service, maybe even parcel and first mile and pallets and all the mix in there. So I think that's the first complexity here. You manage operations across multiple areas. But the second point is very important. All that data that you get is not standardized. Do you all get tracking data back from your carriers? Yes? IT interface? Sorry?
It's time consuming. It's a problem.
It's a problem, right? Does someone still get EDI files from the carrier on tracking? No. Yes, you do? Okay, so that's another issue, right? So all these data points are usually not standardized. They come in different languages, depending on where you ship. They're also in different time zones. That makes it very interesting. That's if we all see like the mix-up between different track events, and the later one was actually earlier because they couldn't figure out the time zones. And then there's no standard for tracking data. So that was really the motivation on why we started Parcel Perform. And why do I go into this is because the basis for reporting, for you to actually be able to analyze it, is that you need to streamline the data, because otherwise there's no grounds for comparison, because the one carrier calls out of delivery very different than the other one, and they have different timestamps to their events. So we need to fully standardize this data across the entire supply chain. Because what I believe in, and hopefully we can bring a lot of people there, whether it's with us or someone else, is we really need to move away from this and like analysts crunching data to something that's a lot more automized by actually being able to just feed a system and then compare this carrier performance with each other. So what can we get out of this? If we get the data right, and Sven, feel free to jump in, but I think if we get the data right, we have first the real-time performance analysis. Why is that important? Because if you know what's going wrong, then you can stop it. If you see that a carrier is late, there was no pickup events, people go on strike in Germany sometimes. If you see that in real time, then you could actually have the choice of giving your volume the next day to another carrier, even if it's just short term. So that can make a huge impact also on your customer satisfaction. Secondly, you all have probably your QBRs with the carriers, and you want to make sure you know more than them, because that's the best possible basis for negotiation. So if you have the data in one place, you can actually evaluate your carriers and pick the right one for your business or optimize the service levels. The other element here is also really important, is to handle inefficiencies, not just on the last mile, but what we see more often than not is there's also inefficiencies in the handover process. So the pickup, for example, do you actually know if all parcels were ready? Maybe they didn't pick them up because they were not there, or the cutoff times were different than aligned. And last but not least, super powerful is if you really have the data in order, then you actually know when the parcel will arrive. And if you can put that in your checkout process, then you really drive up conversion rates. So that's why we believe data is really such a big business lever to your business success. Sven, anything on your end?
Yeah, let me just underpin what you said with some examples. So as I said, these three categories, transparency in costs, transparency in performance and processes, for us, it's very important when it comes to calculation of the contributing margin to also have the agreed cost in the system to kind of predict what is the most cost-efficient way to deliver those products, because we have multi-shipping locations, so we can decide we could do it on a daily basis, but of course this is at the current stage too much effort. But we need to rely on the data, especially in the costs that are in a system, to decide which is the most efficient way to deliver those products. This is on the one side, but on the other side, if you just believe on the data that you agreed on in a contract, but then have a look in the invoices and see, okay, you get extra charges for A, B, C, and so on, then you probably have to figure out, do I have a problem here in my processes, or does the carrier kind of have a topic, and is it just on the paper the most efficient way, the most cost-effective one to send out the products, but in reality it would be much more, or it would be better to do it the other way around. So this is just what we experienced in the past, to also kind of track what is planned cost and what is the actual cost. Because at least we saw deviations in these, at least on the invoices. Second pillar, transparency and performance. Of course, I would like to switch between the carriers on a daily basis based on their performance, but I'm pretty sure everyone here has a capacity issue when it comes to last mile carrier capacity. So, of course, it's a need to also do this based on the performance. But at least for us, it's not that easy to just switch between volumes in the carrier space and the performance, because we really need to also now in the upcoming peak season to rely on the capacities that they provide us to ship out our goods in a timely manner. And then last but not least, I talked about the cost, but the performance. When it comes to processes, you mentioned that it's not only monitoring the carrier, but also when it comes to handing over the product. And I think about claims we can talk in a bit, but just to see where is the process inefficient, because the carrier claims to be quick, but the product has been in the warehouse quite for a bit, to also evaluate these deviations.
Cool, perfect. Thank you. So yeah, what we're saying is next to carrier capability and the cost of delivery, we really want to look at actual carrier performance and the service quality. Now, the big question is, how do we get there? How do we actually make that happen? Because it's a good idea, but how do you bring all this data together? And that's what we're doing on our end by, first of all, having all the data aggregated and standardized. So we have integrations with 700 different carriers. We absorb all the data, and then we map it to actually be able to interpret it. So we map it according to events, to time zones, to languages, to event phases, and so on. And then we basically feed a BI tool that then allows us to really go through the data. And you have an overview of all the parcels, you can search for issues, but you also get performance reports. And today we want to show you some of these reports so you get an impression on how that's possible. Now, what we're not trying to say is that you necessarily have to use our reports. What I'm trying to convince you of is just get a report. And that's also why I'm glad that Sven is here today, because while they're working with us, you also decided to use your own visualization for this data. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think you have to differentiate between what is your business intelligence system or your data warehouse, because yes, we are focusing here mostly on the last mile and reverse business, but as I said, we also have to consider in our supply chain different other KPIs. So the most important thing for us having the right data, or meaning data accurately, that we can use also then in our system. So it's just about this. Do we use your predefined reports, or do we use our own BI reports? Yeah. The most important thing is having the right and accurate data on hand to work with those. And this is, to us, at least a crucial point.
No, 100%. So basically having the standardized data is the true USP. That's what puts you ahead. And then you can figure out how you want to visualize that for yourself. So what we prepared are just a few ideas. You might have different ones, and I would like to hear your opinions. So if you think it's not working or you have a better report, then feel free to chime in, because ultimately we want to learn from each other. But we prepared 5 to 6 different reports to give you a bit of an impression on what is possible. And then we can see how we can further optimize this. One is super simple, but actually when we started Parcel Perform, I realized that not everyone actually has this at hand, is to basically have a parcel count report. How many parcels did I send, and which carrier did I give this to, and best case over time. So you see exactly what's happening. This is also super powerful if you don't control your own warehouse, if you don't know how they allocate this or what's happening to your delivery. So a super simple report, the simplest of all, and I assume you all have it, but in case not, then this is very, very helpful, right? So what we see here is timelines, volumes, and allocation to carriers. That's a very first important step, I would say, for you to get an overview. And obviously, you can do this on an aggregated level as well. So we can see how it splits across a certain time frame. And then this is also quite powerful, because what we put in our system is, okay, now how much would actually be delivered? How much is still active? Very basic reports, but it already helps. And obviously what we figured out is this is a really nice way to also work together with your marketing teams, because that's a super easy visualization to see when something kicked in, okay? So if you want to tell them and see what day you had a campaign on, you should usually see the spike, yeah? This is a weekend that had nothing to do with marketing. So that's a really, really interesting one to kind of go back to them and say, here, see, we had a real spike. It actually worked. There were direct orders. Next one, status delivery report. Also very simple, actually, theoretically, but very, very powerful. So what we're doing in our system here is to basically show exactly how the status splits across the different carriers. Now, this is real parcels, but like a while ago, so let's not blame the carrier for this one. And it's extra small, so we cannot all see. But what you see is some carriers have a really high ratio of delivered first time. Some carriers, this purple stuff, have a really big ratio, 27%, of delivered with issues. And then you see everything that's here in transit still, that has a transit delay, or parcels that were returned. And what is interesting is that maybe sometimes you see a trend that there are certain carriers that had a lot more return parcels. Now, normalized overall carriers, that should roughly be the same number, but what we see more often than not, it's not. Why parcels are returned, involuntarily returned, is because the customer was not at home. Well, that should be relatively same, unless you have different countries, of course. But if in one country, one carrier has a lot more involuntary returns, maybe they didn't try hard enough. Maybe that's a good place to start looking and have a conversation with them. And we do the same then over time, right? So what you can see here is basically the status of a delivery over time across a few different days. Blue is good, delivered first time. The orange down here is returned, and then there's some pending updates. And obviously, the more you look into this direction, the more is still in transit, all this purpose stuff. But the more you look here, the more should be delivered. So what you can easily see is which were the days where you still have performance issues. So if here not everything is delivered yet, then it's still stuck somewhere, often in customs, and we can just filter down and see that then. But the normal development should always be like an X like that to see, okay, these are obviously still in delivery, but these are well underway. Maybe I take a quick break here. Do you also look at this, Sven? How do you visualize this type of data? And what do you do with it?
Just quick one comment to the first one. So as a practical example, yes, of course, we measure how many parcels we shipped out with which carrier. And it's just a simple reason behind it, because of course we have also in our contracts certain volumes agreed on. And if we see that we have to kind of speed up a bit with some carriers, this is something that we use for that. Coming to the second one, status report. On the one hand, it's of course important also to see how is our payment to delivery time, where the ship to deliver is one crucial part of it, to also see when it comes to performance. But I guess, and we are all from logistics here, we do not have time to manage like the 100% in logistics every time. Like there's no day like another day, so we always deal with exception handling. And this is exactly what we use for it, to see exactly where we have issues, where we have to have a look into it, a more deeper one to elaborate, to kind of find the root cause and then get rid of the problem. Sometimes it's a collaboration, sometimes it's also just one partner who kind of has to speed up, but most of the topics need close collaboration. But the baseline is to have the problem, to have the issue visible, transparent, and then to start from the solution.
Perfect, thank you. Now we come to my favorite report, a bit nerdy. Sorry, there was a question.
Regarding the status of the delivery, how do you make sure that the carrier fill out the form? I mean, scan while they're doing the delivery on time, because we have a lot of issues that carriers don't update our system religiously. Sometimes they deliver it and they don't notice us, so we cannot notice the customer, so we end up with customer unsatisfied delivery, and vice versa. It happens all the time with different companies, especially when we did the last mile delivery from SFS, from offline shops.
Yes.
Because we deal with, less experienced, smaller companies, like local companies.
Yeah.
So how do you standardize, like do you have this kind of experience with different type of quality of services?
Sven, anything on your end?
There's lack of data coming from the carrier.
Like this is what I meant with the crucial point when it comes to exception handling. So hopefully it's just a 1-digit percentage or even less. But this is what needs to be elaborated. And we I guess no one of us has a carrier who, when it comes to shipping out high quantities of parcels, who is scanning each and every single parcel at the warehouse, which is kind of put in a swap body. So this is, at least for us, the gray zone. And of course, there are some issues that the carrier says, I have never received the product, and the warehouse says, but I put it in there, and the system says also it's put in the swap body, for example. So these are then the exceptions that I talked about that needs to be closer alignment and closer elaboration, because if this problem just occurs with one carrier and one specific warehouse, then you can take activities and countermeasures and then go and see, go to the Gemba and see what's happening there.
It is a very small percentage, by the way, but when it comes to customer satisfaction, it becomes a big issue.
Yeah.
We have to go to the root cause of it and see what the real problem.
100%.
So that is the tricky part that we need to handle. So, but when you look at the whole value, of course, it's a very small percentage. Lack of data. I'm talking about less than 1%.
hopefully. Yeah.
Then when it comes to customers, it's a different story. That you end up with losing the customer.
Yes, and each customer who is not satisfied is one too much.
Yeah. And we see this quite a lot. So just for, in case not everyone heard this. So the question is, what do we do in two cases, right? The carrier doesn't update the parcel at all, so there is no final delivery scan or something. And the second case is, what if they do it too late? So we analyze both. I didn't bring the reports, but we look into it. One is kind of a missing delivery scan. Ooh, that is great, because once you have that data, you go to the carrier and you say, you didn't deliver this parcels, I'm not going to pay for it. And then basically, they usually, at least if you ship big enough volumes, try to improve that. So as long as you can show them, look, these don't have a final delivery scan. Why are they on my invoice? These and these, how many parcels are there? They usually have an incentive to try to improve it operationally. And what you can easily see from the data is what happened before that scan was missing. So is it one sorting center? Was it only one day? Then maybe, okay, fine, something went wrong. That's one option. And the other thing that we are also analyzing is what happens a lot is that they just kind of update it in bulk, but far too late. So we call this carrier attributable delay in the reporting. So basically, they had scanned it, but the scan gun only gets hanged into the system 5 hours later. So we can actually see this, because on our side, we kind of look for this update super regularly, usually half an hour or something. So then we see, oh, there's an update now, but it's from 4 hours ago. So we can actually do a data analysis and then give you a report to say, look, this is what the carrier does very frequently. And it's very interesting because you see kind of who has on-premise IT in some sorting centers, because they're usually the guys that update this just a couple of hours later. Cool. Yeah, I advocated it already, my favorite report, because that's usually super, super helpful also for your e-commerce store. And it's basically to look at the deliverability statistics of your parcel. So after what time frame, how many % of your parcels actually delivered? Because knowing that can really help you in your customer promise. So we have two different ways of looking at this, one on a carrier level, and then the other one actually on a per country level. So how we read this chart is relatively simple. We have percentage here and days here. And what you can see is, for example, it took 5 days for 50% of these parcels with this carrier to be delivered. But it also took 5 days to have 75% of these parcels for this carrier delivered. So that gives you a very good indication. Obviously, on top, you have to put the filter, so you compare like, for example, one specific country with each other. But you can actually do that in our system, and you then know what would be your promise. So we say, okay, at least 75%, or maybe 80, best case, would be the promise that we give to customer. If this is a country, for example, you say, okay, 80 is somewhere here, well, that would be bad, because then we say it takes us an average of 8 to 10 days for you to get your parcel. And that's a very powerful analysis to just have that data on hand, to then also plug that, for example, in your checkout. Very basic. Best case, you actually know when it's going to arrive. But you can do that. And the same then for the different countries. So once you have this data actually and you see, okay, how do my countries behave? And you can see one here actually had like a same day delivery thing. So like their immediate delivery statistics are super high. The rest is like a lot later. And you can then kind of also optimize the promise that you give in your FAQs, in the store, at checkout. Yes?
Could you also have a look at the regions, for example?
Yes.
If you ship to France, Paris, of course, should be way faster than Bordeaux.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why we standardize locations, so we can compare postal codes. So regions is sometimes a bit arbitrary, because everywhere regions are cut differently. So what we usually do is we compare postal codes. Easiest is the first two numbers, and then you can go more and more granular. And in Germany, we do Bundesländer, so it depends on what the region is respectively, yeah.
Are you talking about other local deliveries, or you're talking about cross-border shipments as well?
So it depends, again, on the filter that you apply. Could be, Netherlands to Germany, or could be within the Netherlands, and then you drill down into postal codes, for example. So the way our system works is you always have from and to, and then you decide, am I looking at cross-border, or am I looking within a country? Yes.
The data is very beautiful, but can we integrate the data that your system delivers into an ERP?
Yes. So we have the visualization on our end. You can download it as management reports, but more importantly, it's an API-based service. So you can get it back via API or better webhooks if you want like immediate calculations, which is exactly what we do for Emma, because you have basically your own Power BI Tableau tool where they want to have the data on their end, so you can do more calculations and enrich it with other order-related data as well, which we can also have in here. So if you want to filter for a certain order category, but you have even more data on Tableau, so we send webhooks whenever a certain thing occurs, can be an event, can be a calculation, and that then powers your data warehouse, right?
Yeah. And yeah, it's not only important or your most favorite report, it's also very important for at least me, because I'm not a friend of an average, because if you have the hand in an oven and the other one in a fridge, the average is kind of okayish, but both is not that comfortable. So it's rather important for at least me to look with the median than the average, and also then with the 90%, what is it, percentile, I guess. It's
yes.
Because this is more accurate to steer the supply chain then.
Can you add the targets set as well?
Yes, very good question. So you can put a rule against it. So you say my expectation or my SLA is this, and then we can measure against SLA. And then I will show that in a second. You also have some reports around that. So maybe just skipping ahead a little bit, transit time, same thing. You want to compare it over time. Actually, same logic. On top, we can also have the average, median, 90%, and so on. But you can also kind of drill down even further and say, okay, first attempt average, first attempt median, 90%, and final delivery. And that kind of makes just a little difference, but a big one sometimes to your customers, right? So first attempt would probably be what you measure your carriers against. Final delivery is the result to your customers. So you then need to pick which KPI you want to optimize for. Okay, the other thing that we, for example, do is we also exclude weekends. So it's not shown here, but that's also quite powerful, because obviously you have some carriers that deliver on weekends, some not. So these are just some high-level stats that we have in the system, but there's basically more options to filter. With and without issues, certain issues included, certain issues not, that all works.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can your software actually detect and have a report for first time attempt delivery or second time attempt delivery, so we can get like a full idea of how many of the parcels were delivered in the first attempt, let's say 87%, and for example, then 1% the second delivery, etc. So you have these types of reports as well?
Yes. These types of reports are quite interesting because they're a bit more customized, because then we have very long conversations what that actually means. Because first time delivered and then going into a parcel locker, is that the second delivery attempt or still the first one? So we don't have it as a standard, but we just basically go through the rules that you want to apply and then we measure it. But we can do that.
I guess one with the postal codes.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because like in some countries, especially you mentioned France, Germany, like pretty big countries, there are certain carriers that have better efficiency in specific postal areas. So practically you can connect this data with your software, like the labeling system, so that you can automatically decide which carrier to use for each postal region maybe. So that's a really interesting feature that your postal has.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get the data out of our system, and then for now you still have to take that decision, but in a few months we will be able to help you with that.
Amazing.
Any other points on this? I think the other thing that is probably also really important, and again, right, we are looking at reports to go back to the carrier and help them to improve their service or help them to give you a better rate. Maybe both works, but I think one element is also is important for us, right? It's not always the carrier to blame. There's very different issues, and it's actually very interesting to look into these different issue types. So because we standardize the data, we can differentiate issue types, and we actually have carrier attributable issues and recipient attributable issues. Now, what does that mean? Recipient attributable is, for example, they were not at home. Or you have cash on delivery, they didn't have the cash on hand. Well, then, okay, the carrier is not to blame for this failed delivery. And we believe it's really important to go into this type of granularity. Then there's an issue that we see quite frequently. That's neither the carrier nor the customer. It's the wrong address. So maybe here in Europe that kind of works, but like we all deliver in Asia. In Thailand, there's no postal codes. It's the right building behind the green one with the blue door. And the carriers can just not find it. And that's often also a reason for failed delivery. But of course, we want to separate that. So we basically have this different issue reporting to split it up, which also means you can see what was damaged, what was the transport delay, what's custom related. So you can really drill down into your data again, and you can see it obviously on an aggregate, but also over time, and also across your different carriers and locations. Cool. And yeah, that obviously also helps your customer service, because what you can then do is, if it's wrong address, you can see it on a parcel, they could proactively call. So before the customer realizes, because the parcel was obviously not yet delivered, you might be able to proactively fix that. Okay, then returns, also super interesting. So we differentiate two types of returns, right? Involuntary returns. Sometimes maybe because the carrier didn't want to go there twice. That is also a very interesting statistic. And then of course, you have normal return parcels. So right here on this report, we look at involuntary returns. We can have the same report for all your return parcels, but this is okay. What happened to involuntary returns? And similar logic. You see the deliver status, so how many of the returns are already back. You can see it over time. You can see it by a carrier, and you can also see the transit times of returns. I mean, who knows how long this actually takes? That might also be an interesting stat to keep track of and making KPI for your business. One super powerful thing that a lot of our clients are using is they use the first return event to also do the refund already. So I think Al was saying that also in his talk earlier for Zigzag. The earlier you know that the parcel was returned, involuntary or not, the earlier you can do the refund, the more likely the customer is going to buy again. But you need reliable data. And every carrier calls this return process very differently. So what we're trying to do is we streamline the first return event, map it as a return, so you can then proceed for your business to potentially initiate a refund process. How do you handle returns, Sven? That's a very important one for you, huh?
Yeah, that's also the CEO of Zigzag, he called it, I guess, ugly product. So yeah, if you ship back a bed or if you ship back an unpacked mattress, this is not feasible at the moment with a one-man handling, or at least we do not have customers who bring the 2x2 meter mattress back to the post office. So yeah, we have two-man handling here at the moment. So that's a different story. But also just as a fun fact, or at least it was kind of paradox to me, because in the Corona pandemic, the tide where everyone was working from home, we experienced, based on the report, that in some carriers in some regions there was a very high return rate because nobody was at home. But this was kind of, at least when we looked at it, very paradox, because it was supposed to be everyone at home, or most of the guys. So, but as it occurred just on a specific carrier, on a specific region, then we could dig deep into the topic and also then solve it.
Yeah, super cool. Who actually has a returns reporting? That's also quite interesting. You have one? You also?
Yes, but done by hand.
Done by hand. Okay, cool.
We need reports, but we do it by hand.
All right, then very last one, and then we let you enjoy drinks hopefully soon. But SLA, so we talked about this. So what our system does is now we have all the transit times, but you still have to look at this stuff, right? So to actually be able to act on it. So we took the next logical step and said, okay, let's define rules, and then we measure against rules. And when a parcel is non-compliant, we can show it to you. And one way to show it is, of course, again, a report across all your parcels. So what you can see here is yearly compliance. This is a really good customer example. Let's see if that would be the same for you, but only less than 1% of parcels were non-compliant. Very unlikely. What we are also seeing is super interesting when we define SLA rules with our customers. For example, Nespresso here in the Netherlands, they used SLA super heavily, and they had a SLA between 6 to 8. So the parcel has to be delivered, evening delivery next day, 6 to 8. So we said everything that's after 6 to 8 is non-compliant. Their non-compliance ratio was like close to 20%. So we were like, okay, this cannot be the way. We realized carriers delivered earlier because basically it's like 5:45 all the time, because that's basically the last thing they do on their shift, and they gave it to their colleagues to still deliver shortly before the end. So SLA rules always need to be reviewed. Like, we cannot do a super hard rule. So how we deal with this is we define it, we look at the data, and then if 20% of our parcels are non-compliant, maybe we need to kind of set new rules or like be a little bit wider. Same for pickup. So you can have an SLA rule for the pickup in the warehouse, but maybe if it's an hour later, it's still kind of okay. So it's important to really define them. But once you define them, you basically see the status over time. So in this case, we can see that these 2 days had like a lot of breaches. So obviously there was a lot of non-compliant parcels, and you can basically see the compliance ratio, which was relatively good for this customer. We can see it broken down also on issues. So if an issue occurred and it was non-compliant, what was the reason for that? And maybe in some cases the shipment was rejected by the recipient, then fair enough. And what we also do, you can see it here very small, is we add a tag to every parcel at SLA non-compliance, meaning that you can also really filter on a per parcel level. And this then is the really fun part, because that's the moment when you go to your carrier and give him a list and say, all these parcels were not delivered on time. Now let's argue about that. Because what often happens in a negotiation, you probably also all know this better, they say, oh no, this was just this one case, this one parcel that you're bringing up now, that was the issue, but all the rest was fine. This way you really have super concrete examples to show them. Anything else on your end?
Yeah, just in addition, because I think we're already over time. SLA is to us the baseline for claims management as well, because this is also a super critical point, not only when it comes to the handover from warehouse to carrier, but also when it comes to the direct delivery of the customer. And this is why I said in the beginning, we at Emma believe that everything that has a direct impact on the customer should be managed locally, because then the customer calls in the customer service of the country team having an issue, and then the country team can directly bring the information together and solve the country ops team and solve it jointly to find a solution then.
Perfect. All right. So just very quickly, in case you haven't met us at the booth, we have a booth here. We Parcel Perform. What do? We aggregate and standardize parcel tracking data across 700 different carriers. Our promise is, no matter who you work with, as long as they have digitally available information, we will standardize it for you and aggregate it for you. So if you're interested or you want to talk to more of our customers, Sven is there, UB Cent is here, thanks for joining, and there's a few others out there, so happy to connect you as well.